Your Highness, a surprised voice came out of the console. I'm sorry, your arrival was scheduled for tomorrow. Also, going by the log, Commander Eerie should be in charge of your vessel. Did something happen? Yes, quite a lot in fact. We are currently in a captured enemy vessel that is drastically overcrowded, so a landing attempt would be too risky. Please send a carrier to pick us up. You are, I'm sorry, I can't just... Silvani sighed. I am Silgvani of Clan Chiron, daughter of King Kirta and Queen Mervani, and First Princess of Homai. Access code Furomel Nogara / Ako Furo Kipa. I get you are just doing your job, but we are all really spent right now. Code confirmed. I'll relay your request. The princess leaned back in her seat. They were finally home. Despite not being alone, she allowed herself to just hang in her chair for a while, her homeworld peacefully lying before the blackness of space. After all that had happened, the sight was soothing. She didn't know how much time had passed when she stood up again. After giving orders to call her when the carrier arrived, she left the bridge and made her way to the captain's quarter. Do you have a moment, Your Highness? She stopped only to see a way too excited Dr. Githey come towards her. Depends. Is it important? Not immediately, but it may become so in the future. She held up her data pad. I did some research regarding yesterday's incident. Carry on. As it turns out, a solid defecation, while rare, happens when a creature frequently eats something it can't fully digest. The princess cocked her head. If you eat something you can't digest, wouldn't you just vomit it out? I said not fully. We absorb around 98.7% of the food we eat, which is why it is nowadays almost never seen in sentient creatures or domesticated animals because we know our in their bodies. But it can be seen in some of the wildlife, even on Homie. And here comes the interesting part. We Vanayeri also had it for the longest time in our history. I never heard that before. The doctor shrugged. Neither have I. Granted, the history of our bowel movement isn't something I would deem to be of public interest. Did you know that we ate Kirli leaves in the past? What? Now, Silgvani was actually curious. Kirli leaves were one of Homie's most valuable resources. In fact, the main reason why their planet was so wealthy and influential was the export of those leaves. Silgvani was no scientist and thus didn't know the details. But the leaves contained something unique that made purifying water incredibly easy and cheap when compared to other methods. And the doctor was telling her they ate those in the past? Why? Are they even edible? They certainly aren't today. The reason why we ate them is actually the same as our use for them now, purifying water. When drinking water and then eating the leaves, they would separate the water from its other contents and then bind them so the water couldn't reabsorb it. The water, now undersaturated, would try to perform osmosis, but since it couldn't take back its original contents, it would instead detox us and then leave the body with the bad stuff, the same way it does nowadays. And the bad stuff that was originally in the water would leave the body bound to the half-digested leaves. The same way, well, what we saw with Nadine. We only stopped eating them once we discovered how to purify water externally, shortly after the Unification War. But why even bother when you can just eat them? Because industrially purifying the water is way more thorough. Ever since that method was discovered, our life expectancy rose by 30%. And since we haven't eaten Kirli leaves in so many generations, we have long but de-evolved that ability. So eating them now would indeed just make you vomit them up again. The princess took a while to process all the information she heard, but then she realized something. Wait, you said almost never? What sentient species does? The Krusnelv, a species that, if my memory serves me right, we already knew for a couple generations when we built Harbortown in the Star Palace. Correct, meaning Nadine should not have any toilet-related troubles there. We should check to be sure, but presumably. Those were some good news. But speaking of Nadine, also reminded her why she had left the bridge in the first place. When she opened the door to the captain's quarter, she found the little alien sitting on the mattress, wrapped in the blanket and leaning against the wall. Her face had changed color again. It was now fairly pale, except right under her eyes where it had a shadow of dark blue. Sigvani was somewhat glad the doctor hadn't followed her because that would have definitely sparked new questions. Nadine, The alien girl, who had apparently been lost in thoughts, startled and looked up to her. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Ah, I mean Your Highness. It's fine. Were you able to sleep? A bit. We've reached Homo. Want to come to the bridge take a look? Yeah, sure. Her voice was different today. Not only did she sound less excited than the princess had hoped, but also somewhat dull. Or was that just due to the translator? Before she could say anything else, Gennett's voice sounded out of the ship's speaker. Your Highness, we're getting approached by the Unifier. Oh, come on, seriously? Hearing that, Nadine stood up. What's wrong? Who is the Unifier? At first, Silgvani just wanted to answer, but then she had a better idea. Want to see?